Hi, Steve Gale here. This video, which is the third in the series of the Industry 4.0 collaborative project, what we're going to be looking at doing is configuring networking on the server and using a PyCom IoT device to upload data to the server's database. So previously what we did was we set up and we configured the IoT test server development environment. And we did that in using Ubuntu 18.04 desktop as our prototype. Since that video was completed, LTS 2004 Ubuntu 2004 LTS has been released, and so the instructions have been updated to include configuration for Ubuntu 2004 LTS. And today, what we'll be doing is we'll actually be switching to Ubuntu 2004. So there's only some subtle differences between 1804 and 2004 as far as this project is concerned. And probably the first one is the installation of guest editions. So guest editions is slightly different. So when you want to install VirtualBox guest editions, this is the command that you would use: apt install gcc make perl dkms, as opposed to the methodology that was used with 1804. Another change with 2004 is the PHP version has been updated. So for 1804 we were using PHP 7.2 and its associated libraries, whereas for 2004 what we're doing is we're using PHP 7.4 and its associated libraries. So other than that, things so far have been pretty similar. And the other thing that we did in the previous video was we installed obviously our Apache, PHP, MySQL, and PHP MyAdmin. Then we configured a database user for PHP MyAdmin. This was our, if you like, our super user. And then we used this username and password, which we configured in the MySQL console, for PHP MyAdmin to create another user in the database, which is the user account that we will use for accessing data from the database. We also did a first deployment of the prototype server code, and we used the deployment shell script to push from the GitHub, the cloned GitHub repository into the root of the Apache web server. Which brings us to where we are now, which is to configure the server IP address, because currently, if we look at our server, I'll just log in. If we look at our server, if we look at the settings that we've got, for the initial configuration in the networking, we're using NAT mode. And NAT mode means that we've got we're sitting behind a VirtualBox firewall. So if I look at the IP address of this machine, I can see I've got an IP address of 10.0.2.15. And what I need to do is to be able to make this device accessible on the network for the IoT devices to be able to upload data into the application server and the database. Then what we need to do is we need to give this server a static IP address, which is what we're going to do next. So the first thing I need to do, the way I do that is by setting up a net plan and editing a YAML file, 99config.yaml, and setting up the networking. But what I need to do is I need to select networking which is appropriate for my network. So what I'm going to do first of all is just have a look at my local network. So I'm going to run a ipconfig all and have a look at my my networking here, which is my Ethernet adapter here. So Ethernet adapter, and I can see that my current IP is 10.0.0.59, and my default gateway is 10.0.0.138, and this is what I'm using for a DNS. I'm using OpenDNS. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use similar configurations for the server, but what I want to do is I want to give the server a static IP address which is appropriate within this range of 10.0.0.x, because it's a subnetted as 255.255.255.0. But I want to choose an address that isn't being used by any other device so that I've got a unique address for this server. And ideally, because it's static, it'll continue to have that address every time. Because it's a static IP setting, it'll continue to have that address every time that it's configured. So I'll just leave these settings up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into run this command and sudo nano netplan99 config.yaml. So I'll just paste that in there. No, I won't. Okay, so what I need to do is I need to make drag and drop bidirectional and shared clipboard bidirectional. Now hopefully I can paste this in now. Yes, fantastic. So I'll use my root password, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to create this file. So I'll see how I go copying and pasting this. So what I might do is, actually better than that, what I'll do is I'll go onto the machine here, I'll run up a new terminal window, and I'll do cd 2020 I40, and I'll run up Visual Studio Code. And if I go to the Ubuntu config folder, you can see here I've got some YAML files. So I'll have a look at this one because this is closest to my home network, and I'll copy all of this, copy that in there, and then I'll go back to my editor here and paste that in there. Now with this YAML file, you need to be very careful about the spacing. So the first thing to note is that the on the first line we've got the network directive, and then the version 2, the V for version 2 sits under the T for network, 2 spaces in. Renderer, network D, network daemon, sits underneath the R for renderer sits underneath the V. Ethernets, you can see, sits under here as well. And then I've got 2 more spaces in, so the E for NPOS3 sits under the H for Ethernets. The address sits under the P there, and my address here I'm using is 10.0.0.49, which if we go back to here, you can see that 10.0.0.138 is my gateway, and 10.0.0.59 is my my host PC, my host for the virtual machine. So it's within that allowable network range. So I'm good for that. My gateway 10.0.0.138, that's gateway 4, that's the IPv4 gateway. And for name servers, I'm using the same name server that I'm using for my host, which is 208.67.222.222. So you would replace that with whatever name server that you were using. And I'm also putting in there a secondary name server as 8.8.8 or Google DNS. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to save that. So I'm going to do Control X, click in here, and Control X, and yes, and enter. And then we've configured our networking. So the next thing to do is to shut this down. So I'll just do a shutdown now. And I'm going to shut this down. And the other thing I need to do is I need to change the settings. So of this VM here, which is this virtual machine, I'll go into the settings here and go into networking, and I'm going to change that from NAT to bridged. So what that'll do is that'll bridge the adapter, the virtual adapter NPOS3 directly onto my local network, and its IP address is an IP address which is relevant directly to my network. Before I was in NAT mode, and in NAT mode I'm sitting behind a VirtualBox firewall. I don't want that in this case. I want my server to be exposed to the network that my host PC is connected to. So I'm going to restart that now in bridge mode, and we'll just wait for it to come up. So you can see here what I've done is I've reconfigured the Oracle VirtualBox settings, and I've done my reboot, and hopefully we should have some networking. So the quickest way to test that networking is functioning correctly would be, I'll just do an IPA and just check that I've got the right address. So I've got 10.0.0.49, and I'll just do a ping to 8.8.8.8, and yes, I can see I can make connectivity. So everything looks pretty good. So if I go back into Firefox, you can see here that networking is working just fine. So that network configuration has actually worked okay.